Comparison can create an excruciating internal pain, not the pain of loss or grief, but the pain of measuring your actual life against someone else's highlight reel. Or worse, measuring your current self against a version of you that no longer exists, or maybe never did. If you've ever felt like you're falling short, not because anything is objectively wrong, but because everyone else seems further along, this video is for you. Because comparison isn't a character flaw. I want you to think of it as information. A few years ago, I was scrolling through social media, as one does when they're bored, and I came across reunion photos from colleges I never attended. Traditional dorms, graduation ceremonies that happened on schedule, the whole experience I missed because my path looked different. High school, then the army. I've moved every few years for most of my adult life. It took me 10 years to finish my undergraduate degree through adult education programs. And for a moment, I felt it, that familiar ache of, I missed that. But I got myself because, yes, I didn't have the dorm experience, but I have an understanding that 99% of the population will never have. I understand military service. I understand what it is to be an Army officer's spouse. I've lived experiences most people will only see in movies. The comparison would erase that. It would take my actual irreplaceable data and call it a deficit. And that's when I realized how many of us diminish our lived experience by comparing it to a standard path we never walked. Comparison isn't a moral failing. It's not weakness. It's not proof that you're ungrateful or self-absorbed. Comparison is information, a signal that your internal navigating system has been disrupted. When you find yourself constantly measuring against others, against past versions of yourself, against who you thought you'd be by now, it means something deeper is asking to be addressed. Let's look at what comparison actually is and what it's trying to tell you. Here's something you might not realize. The kind of comparison you engage in shifts as you move through life. In early adulthood, about 40% of our comparison is internal, comparing ourselves to past or imagined versions. And 60% is external, measuring yourself against peers, colleagues, friends. By midlife, that flips. Now it's 60% internal comparison and 40% external. This isn't an exact science. These are observational patterns from clinical work, but the shift is real. Midlife isn't just about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about reconciling with the multiple versions of yourself. The one you were, the one you imagined you'd be, and the one you actually are. And comparison, it's how we avoid that reconciliation. Most of us think comparison is just one thing, me versus them. But there are actually three versions we compare against. The first one is, I used to be more energetic, more focused, more capable. We're focusing on the self, the past self. I used to be able to handle so much more. I used to say, I'll sleep when I'm dead, because I was always rushing to the next thing. Today, my younger self could run circles around me. And comparison mode would call that a loss. But an authentic assessment recognizes that pace was part of what depleted my nervous system to the point where I now have to guard recovery like a sentinel protecting Fort Knox. And slowing down, it's given me the capacity to actually be present, to experience a fresh orange at peak ripeness, to see the ocean after more than a decade inland and actually feel it. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. The second form of comparison is the imagined self. This one's the most painful because you're grieving someone who never existed. The version of you who would be healthier by now, further along in your career, living in a different house, a different city, living a different life. The should have been version. And here's the truth. That version was built on assumptions that didn't account for reality, for chronic illness, for caregiving responsibilities, for the fact that life doesn't follow projections. The third comparison is other people, and this is the classic comparison. Their success, their relationships, their curated social media presence. What we rarely factor in, we never truly know another person's experience. We see outcomes, we don't see the compromises, the exhaustion, the parts they're struggling with behind the scenes. Comparison takes your lived, messy, real experience and measures it against someone else's performed, edited, incomplete narrative. And it's fundamentally unfair. Now, let's talk about where comparison gets most dangerous in relationships. You know the phrase, I love you, I'm just not in love with you. What that actually means, I'm comparing you to Twitterpation. Twitterpation, that biochemical cocktail of dopamine novelty that makes new relationships intoxicating. Someone new revitalizes the senses. They don't come with history, bills, or decades of compromises, the feeling of being put last. And suddenly, you're comparing an established relationship with all its reality and wear to the fantasy of starting over. This is the most unfair comparison possible. You're comparing a broken-in shoe to a shiny new one, a real person to a projection, integrated reality to idealized potential. But here's what Western individualism teaches us. Am I happy? Are my needs being met? Do I feel fulfilled? These aren't bad questions. But when they're the only questions, when personal happiness is the only metric, we miss something crucial. Collectivist cultures ask different questions. How will this choice affect my partner? What about my family? What ripples will this create in my community? Neither approach alone is complete. Pure individualism leads to constant comparison, always seeking the next better option. Pure collectivism leads to self-abandonment, staying in situations that corrode you from the inside. The integrity-based approach asks both. Am I being true to my values? Are my choices leading me toward integrity or away from it? And will I regret this in 5 years? Because here's the developmental truth. You take yourself with you. The new relationship will eventually become the old relationship because you are still navigating the same unresolved integrity questions. If you're in a relationship that's safe, but you find yourself comparing it to the excitement of something new, the question isn't, is this relationship good enough? The question is, what am I longing for that I'm trying to find outside of myself? Here's the reframe. Comparison isn't the disease, it's the fever. When you find yourself constantly comparing, it's a signal that your internal compass has been disrupted. You're looking outward for validation because you've lost the capacity for internal assessment, grounding in your own values. This mechanism works like 1, integrity disruption occurs, your values become unclear. 2, internal assessment becomes impossible. I don't know if this is right for me. 3, external comparison fills the void. Let me see what everyone else is doing. 4, comparison creates more disruption. You move further from your authentic self. 5, the cycle intensifies. Confidence erodes, making internal assessment even harder. This is why you can't just stop comparing. You have to restore the internal navigating system. And here's what helps. Not willpower, not discipline, not shame, connection. Specifically, activities that engage what's called the second chakra. This is your creative and relational energy center. Things like creativity, such as writing the book you've been thinking about. Paint happy little trees like Bob Ross. His videos are all over YouTube. Or build something with your hands. Shared experiences. Take a dance class together. Learn something new as a team, sword fighting, car restoration, anything. Build a puzzle. Laughing together. Watch silly cat videos. The Kiffness is one of my favorites. Find comedians who make you actually laugh. Laughter increases dopamine naturally, without the comparison trap. Playfulness. Act like a tourist in your own town. Visit a familiar hiking trail, but listen to nature like a child would. These activities don't have to be expensive or intense. They just have to engage the part of you that comparison has put to sleep. Because what you're actually longing for when you compare is aliveness, vitality, connection, creative flow. Comparison promises that if you just had what they have, or became who you used to be, or matched that imagined version, then you'd feel alive. But that's the trap. Aliveness doesn't come from comparison. It comes from engaging with your actual lived life. So, here's the question to ask yourself. Am I being critical or curious about this gap? Critical is the comparison trap. Why can't I be like that? What's wrong with me? I should be further along. Curious is an authentic assessment. What does this capacity shift teach me? What do I need right now? How has my path uniquely shaped me? When I'm in authentic assessment mode, I have grace and understanding for myself. When I'm in comparison mode, I'm harsh, critical, and unforgiving. The marker between them, does the assessment lead towards self-understanding or self-condemnation? One opens doors, the other closes them. Your life is your data, not a deviation from someone else's template, not a rough draft of who you should have been. Your actual lived experience, with all its detours and delays and unexpected wisdom, that's the only valid reference point. When comparison pulls you away from that, ask these 3 questions. Are my choices leading me toward my values or away from them? Am I being an integrous person? And will I regret this in 5 years? These questions restore your internal compass, not by eliminating comparison, but by giving you something more reliable to navigate by. If this video helped reframe and let you see the comparison differently, like and subscribe the video for navigating midlife transitions without losing yourself in the process. These videos come out 2 to 3 times a week, Sunday, Wednesdays, and occasionally on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're not behind. You're just on a path that doesn't fit someone else's timeline. And that's exactly as it should be.